Welcome back, ball fans, to another edition of the Balls for Life podcast. I'm Bob. This is my brother Tim. We're going to talk about the 12-team playoff that goes into effect in 2024 and why there is a major misconception out there that Tennessee's, or SEC, is going to get 4, maybe 5 teams in the playoffs. And some very respected people out there are saying this, and we really believe they're wrong. I think the vast majority of the years we're going to get 3 in
Yeah,
there.
I would say three's normal.
And I think we will get 3. But 4 and 5, five's never going to happen.
Yeah, five's out, and two is as likely as four.
Yes. So, yeah, we're going to dive into that and explain to you why we believe that and show you a little bit of graphs and stuff and try to get you an idea of,
Well, where we're coming from.
yeah, why we think this. All right, let's dive into it, guys.
Okay, well, let's just start out basics. As we all know, we're going to a 12-team format, and it's going to have the 6 conference champions and then 6 at large. So right off the bat, you say, well, there's only 5 power conferences. So, who's number 6? And that is going to be the highest rated conference champion of the other 5 little conferences, like the Sun Belt, I think the American, the other ones escape my name right now.
Yeah.
I don't know if the MAC might be one of them,
Right.
but anyway, so there'll be one of those people get in.
Right.
Regardless.
There's one team right there that most likely won't deserve to be in that. And that's another reason why we think it ain't like the 12 best teams are going to make it every year. That's not going to be the case.
Oh, no.
You're going to get one. There's one team that's probably not going to be one of the top 12 teams.
Yeah. And Bob, they may not be one of the top 25 teams.
Yeah, there's no guarantee they're going to be top 25, top 30, just the best. I mean, you're talking about a Memphis, Tulane, Boise State type team.
Which can have good years.
They can.
Tulane had a nice season last year.
Yeah. But nobody thought they was playoff material.
No, of course not.
Yeah, even in the 12-team format. So, yeah.
So really, you're really going down already to actual, let's go to the 11-team playoff, really, because that's what you're dealing with. You're getting one tossed in there as a gift to these smaller conferences. I understand wanting a place at the table. I get that. But it's going to get ugly some years.
And is there a exclusion then for Notre Dame if they're in the top 12?
No, there's no exclusion for them, Bob.
They're not.
No, because if they're in the top 12, they're in the top 12.
Right. I mean, they're in. But
Right, they'd be one of the at-large teams if they're
At-large.
one of the 6 highest-rated at-large teams.
Yeah.
And we all know, historically, they've been very fortunate when it comes to rankings, and even with the playoff committee.
Heisman's stuff, yeah.
Yeah, but even with the smaller committee and some of the people behind, because there's actually more committees for the college football playoff than just a selection committee, and we'll dive into that a little bit also, and how they have a little bit of an outsized footprint in those other committees.
Yeah. It's a little bit of concern, but we'll share that shortly. Let's talk about the at large, Tim. We're going to give you some examples, maybe, of what we see. But
Bob, before we do that, can we step back just for a moment and let's talk about one that we talked about, that little conference getting in, right? Because obviously they're not on the level of the Big 12 or the ACC or SEC. But while we're at it, all the Power 5 conferences are not created equal either.
no.
There's a huge difference in the quality of the SEC versus the quality of the PAC, whatever they're calling themselves now.
Right.
Even what like TCU was last year, who had a fantastic season. And they did have a couple of big wins. But if they'd played in the SEC, where they had to play Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, every other, 4 or 5 times a week, then, I'm betting 8-4, 9-3 probably.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's a 3-loss team, and no way they make the top 4.
Yeah, there's no way. So all these other conferences are not, and I'm not saying they don't deserve a spot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But we need to look at, when we get into those at-large things, that's where the quality of these conferences is going to have a bigger impact.
I agree, Tim.
So at that point, before I stutter again, go ahead, Bob.
Well, Tim, we're going to look at like an example of a scenario. I thought that might help some people to kind of get an idea of what we're looking at here. I've done kind of a just a mock up just to see, don't get offended if this is just a purely a
Hypothetical.
we all know Tennessee's winning it all, but anyway, but the automatic conference champs, I just threw a team in there. So for just example, I put Georgia for the SEC, Ohio State for the Big Ten, Clemson ACC, TCU for the Big 12, and Oregon for the Pac. And then you have, that's five. Then you've got a non-power 5 conference champ, which we was discussing earlier. Then you have the at large, and that's the top 6 that's left. Just a scenario out there, I put in Michigan as the number 2 team from the Big 12.
10.
Big 10, yeah, sorry. And
or Big King count because they're at 16 now.
Yeah. Let's say Notre Dame, because that's probably going to happen.
Some years, maybe every other year.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. About half, something like that. Alabama is the number 2 SEC team. USC, which is in the Big Ten now, and I think their Big Ten's probably going to get 3 teams in most years.
Yeah.
After adding USC and UCLA.
Yeah, to go with Penn State. I mean, I will say they've upgraded their conference with those 2 teams. It actually gave them a little bit more of some heavy punchers at the top most years.
Most years. Yeah. And then I slid in there Tennessee and Florida State as the second team from the ACC. Now, there's 3 teams from the SEC, and that looks doable. And I think that's going to be probably what we get most years. But there's the problem with all that is, people say we get 4. But where's that 4 going to come from, Tim?
Well, that's a damn good question, Bob. Because we're going to be beating each other up.
Right.
Wins and losses matter. And is a 3-loss ACC team going to get in over a 2-loss Big 12 team, or a 2-loss ACC team, or a 2-loss Pac-10 team?
Right.
Because, a lot of people don't see anything but W's and L's.
It's true. And I think one of the issues will the SEC get 4 teams in versus, say, a Pac-10 or Big 12 getting a second team in? So I don't think they're going to allow one team from those 2 conferences getting in, and then 4 or 5 from the SEC. They're going to raise too much cane, whether it's justified or not.
Yeah. Well, Bob, I mean, you say raise too much cane. Who are they you're talking about?
Yeah, the committee.
The committee.
Right. That's who we need to discuss.
Yeah. And also, outside the committee, they're in a partnership with the conferences. Mm-hmm. So the conferences have a seat at the table outside of the committee, and you'll see they actually have a seat inside the table, inside the committees, various committees that make up the college football playoff.
I agree. And the SEC is not well
we're
represented
by the other conferences, and we're not well represented. We're underrepresented.
Yeah, and that's a problem. I think that's going to be an issue for us. We're not represented equally, and we'll show some graphs on that here. And you see that there's some disparity here. You'd think the SEC would have a lot of representation, but we don't.
We know, look, if we had 4 teams in the top 6 teams in the country, then I say we're getting 4 in, okay?
Right.
But when we have that 4th team that's sitting down around 10 or 11, then I'm saying watch for that team toward the end of the year that's all of a sudden get jumped by this team, get jumped by that team.
Yeah.
Because they don't have no rhyme and reason. We've seen that already.
Oh, yeah.
They say, well, we do it every week, and we just base it on the previous week. We don't have a set system of doing this, which is good because they're going to have to have something to fall back on when they start this right here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, Tim, and it's just going to be hard for a three-loss SEC team, and I'm not sure if that's going to be a three-loss team for that fourth spot, but we're probably getting into that. Yeah, I don't know if a three-loss SEC team is going to get in over, say, a one-loss or a two-loss Pac-10, Big 12, these other conferences. It's
Well,
just going to
definitely
be
not
hard.
going to get in over a one-loss team.
No.
Not a three-loss team won't. Even though the strength of schedule might be the only reason of the two extra losses, it won't matter.
Yeah. I think the strength of schedule is not going to help us that much when it comes to this 12-team playoff.
It doesn't. So some people consider it, and everybody claims they do.
Mhm.
But I've just seen too many people throughout my whole life that will just, point to record and say, well, they beat everybody on their schedule. Or they beat everybody with one team on their schedule. What'd you do? You should have won more. Well, he's like, look, I played the New York Giants and the Dallas Cowboys, and you played Knox Central.
Right.
There's a difference.
There is a difference. Yeah. But in some people's eyes, there's no difference. It's a win and a
Yes.
loss. And that logic is flawed to say the least.
Yes. Now, Bob, I think one thing you had pulled up, you discussed with me before, was what happens if, let's say, Oregon's had a great year. They've went that 12-0 regular season. And then they're facing who's going to be in the new pack. There's no telling who's going to be in it in a couple of years, but right now, who would they be playing? Maybe a Utah.
Maybe Utah.
Let's say Utah was 9-3,
Hmm.
and then they beat in the championship game. They beat Oregon,
Which is
so they have their seat at
undefeated.
the table.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's going to be something that nobody's discussed is the fact that you get that conference championship game. It's the conference champion that gets in, not the highest ranked team
right.
necessarily.
So they're automatically you've got another team all of a sudden that probably would have never had a shot at getting in. They've taken one of those six at-large state spots, or well, they've taken one of the conference championship spots, and then the Oregon or whoever, the TCU, if they'd possibly last year, would have still got in because of overall record. So all of a sudden you've got two out of the pack, maybe two out of the Big 12, maybe two out of the ACC.
Yeah, when you start talking two out of the Pac-10 and Big 12 and conferences like that, that's just another spot away from the SEC. That's another reason why we're not going to get four teams in. I mean, it's going to have to be a perfect scenario. Notre Dame's not going to be able to make it, and all the conference champions are going to have to win out,
Yeah.
and then we're also going to have to get hoping that there's just no other really good teams that pop up there that's got like just one loss, even though they played a very weak schedule. I mean, let's say in the
Let's
Big
go over some
12.
of these conferences, Bob.
Let's go Big 12 here. Let's look at Big 12 for a second. They're very weak, but they're guaranteed a spot in there. I mean, let's just look at this conference and let you decide. Do you think this conference deserves a team in there every year? I mean, maybe some years, but not every year. But TCU, Baylor, Cincinnati, which has moved into, there's four new teams going into Big 12 starting then. Cincinnati, Kansas State, UCF, West Virginia, BYU, Iowa State, Kansas, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, and Houston. Now, which one of those teams, Tim,
Well,
scares
and
scares you?
no one really, but I'm not going to say one year one of those teams don't deserve to be in there.
Maybe. Yeah.
I'll say maybe half the time, maybe
Probably.
one of them
Yeah.
should be one of the top 12 teams.
Yeah, I agree.
Excuse me. But there's a lot of years that is a conference that's not going to have a national championship quality candidate coming from that conference, but they're still going to have one in there.
Let's just discuss the selection committee members, Tim. Something that's we've talked a little bit about, and I think that's going to play a big part in what we get in there.
Okay, well, let me just go back a little bit, Bob. Now you've got some of the details in front of you, but the selection committee is, obviously part of the college football playoffs thing, but it's not the only committee there. They also have a playoff system management committee. They have a board of managers. They have athletic director advisory board. And all these people, I believe the playoff system management team might be the committee, maybe the people that select the selection committee. Now, each of these boards and playoff system management teams, they have one representative, be it either the conference commissioner on the playoff system management committee or an athletic director from that conference on the board of managers. Mm-hmm. And they'll do it from each of the 10 conferences, okay, plus Notre Dame. So there'll be 11 on the committee. And you might say, well, that seems pretty fair. Everybody's got an equal shot, you know. And I might agree with that, except for the fact that human nature has jealousy and biases built in. And I think that's probably how we get to a thing that you're going to talk about in just a moment. Let's look to see on the selection committee itself, each of these people on it have a connection to a conference, okay? So we're going to show you that it's not a one-time deal, but the committee is not evenly distributed.
That's right, Tim. You can look here and see Big Ten's got 3, ACC 2, Big 12 2, Pac-10 2, Mountain West 1, American Conference 1, and the SEC with only 1 representative on that committee. So when they get down and behind closed doors, and they're, you're talking about the SEC's 3rd team or 4th team, and you have all these other conferences represented.
Yeah, and everybody's putting in a secret ballot, by the way.
Right.
That's how it works. It's a long format, actually, of how they do it. They repeatedly vote over and over as they go down the list, but that's beside the point. But yeah, so automatically you think, man, Big Ten's a little overrepresented.
Yeah. And
obviously the SEC well underrepresented. But maybe Bob, maybe that's a one-time deal, Bob.
No, that's been the past. That's been the way it's always been. It seems like. Here's another one showing the past selection committee members.
Okay, surely we're better than that, right?
No, I wish you'd think.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure what kind of negotiations happening here. I mean, who's?
Well, once again, it's one of these other committees that have a lot of people upset that the SEC wins the national title almost year after year after year, and they want to spread their wealth. They want to try to stymie the SEC.
Yeah, let's look at this. Big 12 with 6 representatives, Big 10 with 5, ACC 3, Pac-10 2, Sunbelt 2, American 2, SEC 2. I mean,
well, that was just coincidence, Bob.
Yeah.
Coincidence.
That's one reason why we get kind of some iffy selections sometimes. So we're like, hey, what's going on here? That's not going to change. I mean, I think most years there's going to be a 4th SEC team. They're going to be like, hey, everybody knows they're better than this other team.
Yeah.
But they're not going to get in because of some of these factors, and this is one of them.
Yeah. And then once again, it goes right back to the other thing, too. If you're in a partnership with the Big 12, the ACC, the Pac-12, and you've got to look at them and say, hey, guys, I know y'all, we just want the best. So you don't care just to get one team in. Well, we put 4 in from the SEC, do you?
Yeah. They're going to buck on that.
Yeah. They're going to say, if you want us to stay in this thing, we got to have a little bit more seat at the table. We got to get a second. I mean, I'm saying every one of those conferences will get a second team in, but there's going to be that 4th team from the SEC is going to be difficult.
It's very difficult, and 5's never going to happen. I mean, it's just
not under the current format.
No,
there'll have to be conferences that go off to the side before that ever happens.
Exactly. It's going to be interesting, and like we said before, I do think this is going to be changed once these flaws are shown.
Well, you'll see some tweaking, but historically, how quick is anything NCAA or college sports accomplished?
That's true. It's like they were talking about a playoff for decades before they actually went to one.
Yeah, they don't use a time clock, but they use a sundial. Yeah. I mean, they are archaic. I mean, we've seen more change in the last 2 or 3 years than we've seen in the last 35. So maybe it's a sign they're a little uh, opening up to change.
Yeah. Well, it's just kind of like with
But
the NCAA, the penalty stuff. Something you would think would take a week or two to come back on. It's a year or two later. I
hey,
mean,
how about
that's
this, Bob? LSU just got handed down some sanctions
mhm.
that date back to 2012.
Yeah.
It's been a
It's
decade.
crazy. Yeah. It's laughable, really. I mean, how do you justify that? If you think, I mean, is there one person there that's going over all this stuff? I mean, just like one dude in the back room.
Well, okay, it's like here's
I think I could do that.
yeah. Well, here's one thing. When Tennessee went before the committee here a few months back, the committee doesn't stay there and discuss the Tennessee case. They don't reconvene a week later to discuss the Tennessee case.
Hmm.
They go their separate ways, and then months later, after maybe a Zoom call here or a text there, they finally come to a meeting because they don't have a people whose job is only to do this. So a lot of these people are ads or in the academic section of universities. Guess what? That's their main job.
Yeah.
This is something that's an honor that's been bestowed upon them, but they have a life, they have a main job, and then they'll get around to this when they get around to this.
Exactly.
So,
One other thing we want to talk about that's been a really big hot topic that's tied into this is the SEC schedule. Whether or not it should be, you hear everybody, it's like 8 teams, 9 teams. Which one should it be? And I think me and him both kind of like the 8 team
yeah,
format. And it's part of it's because of all this. We need, we don't need any more losses. I mean, if you go to a 9 game schedule, that means half the teams in the conference is going to end up with an extra loss.
well, it is. Then what would you say to people that say, well, yeah, but the other conference is already at 9?
Well, look at the other conferences. Look who's in that conference.
Good point.
They're not playing LSU, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma, Tennessee. I mean, they're not playing all these teams. I mean,
Yeah. The only,
you can't
the,
play Iowa and
yeah.
Illinois and Indiana and teams like that every week. We don't get
No.
that
No, I mean,
luxury.
listen, we do have teams that sometimes aren't, murderers row at the bottom of the conference. Every conference has it. I'm not going to try to blow smoke up your tailpipe and tell you that Vanderbilt's going to the New York Six Bowl this year.
Right.
You know, but by the same token, well, just look at the history. Where's the national championships coming from? Where are the NFL draft players coming from? And there's no denying that the SEC has been king, and
Yeah.
it's the toughest conference.
By far, really.
So, but that's really not all of it. I don't have a problem playing another tough game. Do you?
Oh, no. I think what we should do, though, instead of playing another SEC team, is play one of the other conference teams.
So instead of one required Power Five opponent, go to two required
Yeah,
Power
go to
Five.
2. Because if these other conferences that we spoke about, let's like that Big 12, look at all those weak teams or mediocre teams. One of them's going to sneak in one of these years, or a Pac 10 team's going to sneak in the playoff simply because they didn't play anybody any count. If they got a loss from an SEC team, then we're a lot much better off. The conference is better off. Plus, it gives you a barometer of how the conference is doing,
It
how
does.
that conference is doing. Really, if we're sitting here playing all SEC teams every week, you don't have a good grasp of where your team is until you get to the playoffs.
Yeah. And let's face it. I mean, historically, look, everybody loves cupcakes. I've got a sweet tooth too. I'll take them all day long because I know that some people don't look beyond record. But you know, I don't have a problem going out and measuring ourselves against these other conferences. And like you said, it benefits us because whereas a 9 game schedule will give half the teams in the conference an extra loss,
Hmm.
a 8 game schedule with two Power Five conferences do not guarantee half the teams a loss.
Exactly.
Actually, I think you looked up a stat.
Historically, we win 80% of our non-conference games. Now, that's not us playing, Michigan or USC every week. That's
Obviously.
some lesser teams in there, obviously, but we win around an 81%
Yes.
clip, I believe it is.
Yeah, and I believe even against other Power Five conferences, you're going to look at a 2-1 split
Yeah.
most years. So you're talking, there definitely can be a team in there that we bump out of the playoff consideration. Maybe Auburn beats a hot Penn State team that year.
Right.
You know,
That's more wins for the conference because we're automatically, like I said, you're going to end up with half the teams with a loss if you play if conference game. There are more wins for the conference and more losses for these other teams.
Yeah,
It plays out to our advantage.
TV is still happy because they
It's a
get
big game.
big games.
Yeah. And we can play. I mean, how many times have we played some of these teams? It'd be nice to also play some of these historically other big time teams every now and then.
Look, I see people getting upset sometimes when they say, "Well, we got, let's say, Purdue or Oklahoma State or something like that on your schedule." But honestly, I don't have a problem with playing middle of the road. They don't have to always be the top of the top. I mean, it'd be nice to go up and see Champaign, Illinois one time. Go down to Stillwater, watch Oklahoma State. Head out West Coast, Eugene, Oregon. And or even head out to see Stanford.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of great road trips that I would love to be a part of if I
Oh,
could.
yeah. Yeah, it'd be awesome. Much better than going to see an SEC team that we've played 30 times in the last 60 years or whatever. I mean, we've played them. Some of these teams we're playing every single year, sometimes even twice it comes around. So, maybe beat them in a conference championship game or something.
Yeah.
So, that is something to talk about, Tim, but, I think, like, to reiterate what we're saying, 8-game schedule would be best for us, especially under the current 12-team format.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to get in 4 teams, 5 teams, 4, every now and then, but
It's going to be rare, though.
extremely rare.
We have to deal with too many biases and everything. But, I mean, I would say I'd put money on 3 most every year. I'd put money on 3 for the Big Ten almost every single year. And there's 4 of the 6 teams already off the table.
Yeah.
So you got 2 more slots, so.
Yeah, we're going to throw up some graphs here with the other conferences and their the members of their, and just look at them and just see, hey, give you an idea of what the alignment looks like real quick.
Yeah, and it could change over the next. I mean, we're in a state of flux right now, Bob.
And it's probably going to change.
I mean, look at the ACC right now. Pop them off if you don't care.
Yeah, you got Clemson, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, Pitt, Virginia Tech, Virginia, Louisville, Boston College, Syracuse, Georgia Tech, North Carolina State, Duke, Wake Forest.
So we got some teams in there that's had some success.
Right.
Obviously, Clemson's been very good last couple of decades, 15 years mostly though.
Mm-hmm.
Florida State, has a legacy. Miami, but they've also most of those have been kind of almost in the same rut Tennessee was in for a long time. But I mean, there's some quality people there. Here's the question though, Bob. 2 years from now, is that the ACC?
I doubt it. I mean, some of these conferences, the ACC, Big 12, Pac 10, they're going to have to do something. They're going to have to make some negotiations. I really think instead of a Power 5, there's going to be a Power 4 coming pretty soon because there's just not going to be enough decent teams to make it work. What happens if a Clemson or Florida State, Miami or North Carolina, what if 2 of those comes to the SEC? And that's been a real possibility.
And 2 may go to Big Ten.
Yeah.
You might lose 4 out of that conference real quick.
And then that conference ends up being extremely weak.
Yeah. But once again, if they do not fold, they'll still have a place in the top
And the
six
12 team.
conference.
Yeah, they will. And I mean, right or wrong, they'll have a guaranteed champion in there.
Yes, they will. And so you went over there. Who else we got? Now, Big Ten, I applaud them. They picked up a couple of people that could be pretty damn good teams in given years.
Yeah.
Although USC and UCLA both have, not always been at the top. They haven't been the consistent teams that obviously the Ohio State, Alabama, etc.
The Pac-10's one, to me, looks pretty weak. I put theirs up here. They got Oregon, Utah, and Washington. 3 pretty good teams. I'm not going to say they're, world beaters. None of them's won a national championship.
Oh, but you know what? If they got into the playoff, I'm not going to be upset about those teams. They're consistently pretty well.
Those 3 teams are teams that could possibly get in there, in my opinion. It's the ones underneath there: Stanford, California, Colorado, Oregon State, Arizona State, Arizona, Washington State. A lot of mediocre teams in there. Teams that I wouldn't mind to play as part of an extra 2 power opponents.
Yeah, sign me up.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind playing California or Arizona or somebody like that.
Yeah. And to be honest about it, once again, in 2 years, there's already rumors of Oregon and I believe Washington having fillers out to the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's been some rumors about Colorado moving to the Big 12.
Oh, that's true. And I think maybe taking one of the Zona schools with them too, Paul.
Yeah, I think so.
So, you can have a shell of that conference. But you know what? They'll add a San Diego State or
just a weaker team.
Yeah. And keep the conference alive, and they'll continue to have a seat in the 16 conference champions.
Yeah, so that's why I don't think the SEC should beat themselves to death with a 9-game schedule. I even seen one guy say something about 10-game. I mean, that's just crazy. But
yeah,
I'd even go, if the math worked out as far as a rotation, I would favor a 7-game SEC schedule. Let's beat up on these other conferences a little bit more.
But Bob, with the 9-game schedule, I understand that it will help keep more rivalries going that we really don't want to see the end of. But at the same time, it's not the end of the world if you're playing every other year instead of every year.
Right.
I'd rather have a rival that I play every other year than one that I haven't played in 10.
Mm-hmm.
But on that note, that's a whole nother story, a whole nother podcast probably, Bob.
Yeah. I think we covered quite a bit today, and I hope everyone can kind of get a better idea of why we were thinking 3 teams are most likely going in every year.
Yeah, it's not going to be Bonanza for the conference with a new 12-team playoff. So if you don't care, if you enjoyed the video today or got a little something out of it, give us a like, give us subscribe, check out some of those other content. Leave a comment down. Tell us how we're wrong. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you will.
Yeah.
And we'll talk back with you. I mean, we'll discuss it with you a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
So
we'd like to hear the other people's feedback.
Yeah. I'm not saying we are always right. It just turns out the way a lot.
Yeah.
But on that note, Bob, on that lie, I guess we'll just have to wait and see you the next time, people.
All right. Go Big Orange.
Go Big Orange, baby.